Možemo da počnemo. Dobar dan.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to greet you all and thank you for the number of you that came to visit us. I am presiding the Fair Alliance Council, and we are now handling a specific topic. Basically, we will be talking about macroeconomic trends in the next year. Risks haven't been higher recently, and the environment is relevant for all our members, irrespective of the size of the sector and export orientation. I think that we have a gathering here, a group of relevant colloquiators here, and I would like to extend my thanks to Julia Ustjugova, the IMF office head, Miloš Zečević of ILM, the manager of liabilities and assets, and Uroš Milosavljević, the KPMG director, CEO. And I would like to stress that this session is somewhat specific because, with the exception of IMF, all our speakers represent our members. So basically, I would like to stress that the Alliance is your association and your platform for discussion. This discussion will last for an hour. And after that, and during the discussion, everybody will have 15 minutes for sharing opinions, and then we will devote some time for questions and answers. And we stated in our invitations that we have created on Slido Link a platform for you to ask questions. It's #economy 2023. Let me remind you of this, and also I would like to remind the audience who joined us online that we will have a section that concerns Q&As in the end, and I would like to ask our representative of Atlantic Group, Zoran Daljević, to open the session. Dear members of the Alliance, dear guests, welcome to our gathering today. And I would like to say only a couple of words about our Fair Alliance competition. Fair Competition Alliance, we have been established based on NALED's initiative to support the government and society to strengthen fair competition and to combat or to curb the shadow economy and to improve the business environment in the country. And I can proudly say now that we gather around 50 socially responsible companies around with 40,000 plus employees, which is an impressive number, and that we represent a good portion of our business community in Serbia. And therefore, I would like to stress that one of the basic tasks of the Fair Alliance, of the Fair Competition Alliance, is to support the government to strengthen the fair competition, but also to prepare programs to combat the shadow economy as one of the basic prerequisites for the progress of our society and economy, the economy. And NALED and the government and other stakeholders and factors have been involved in this effort. But the point is that we will curb the shadow economy, and while doing so, we will increase the awareness of the citizens about the importance of the legal business, of the doing business legally, and abiding by the law. And we will also like to stress the importance of this for the economy. And in addition to this, we cover other topics such as cashless payments, such as fiscalization, which is topical right now, electronic invoices, flexible forms of labor engagement, improvement of the inspectorates, and digitalization. And we work with other NALED's alliances to support this topic. Today's topic is not the usual one. It's not in our focus usually, but given macroeconomic trends that were observed in the last last year and in the post-pandemic era and the era during the war in Ukraine, many things have happened during the last 12 months, beginning with the abnormal growth of the energy sources and other raw materials. So we consider the macroeconomic trends in 2023 to be an interesting topic, and we would like to discuss the framework and what we can expect during this year. This is why we organize it at the beginning of the year in January, to discuss this and to let our esteemed panelists share their opinions and ask the questions that you will, answer the questions that you will ask. And we will see more what the conditions are and in this year for us, for doing business. We are open for meeting colleagues. We are looking forward to meetings like this to extend our knowledge and to share the knowledge and to exchange information and ideas, because this is the way to improve. We believe that this is the way to improve our development, and not only of our businesses, but also of society in its entirety. Thank you for coming. We will have to start considering bigger conference rooms, and I would also like to urge you to ask questions. I would like to suggest for us to get started with this working session. What is your opinion, can you tell us please, of the current situation, of the external environment, of the internal environment, of the local environment? How do you see this coming year? What the risks are, and what should we as alliances pay attention to, and what businesses should pay attention to?
Invited me to join this discussion about the economy, about economic policies. And let me start by wishing you a calm 2023 year ahead, because past year was really turbulent and the global economic prospects significantly deteriorated quickly after the war started, and then coupled with the high and persistent inflation, supply chain disruptions, energy concerns. These are all the factors that significantly cut the growth prospects for Europe and for Serbia. Indeed, we all celebrated the warm weather over the past quarter, and it did help a lot with the current account deficit. Right, it's shrunk the current account deficit in Serbia and in Europe. It did help with the fiscal outcome, and it also made the quarterly growth less negative than it would have been otherwise. However, we still project some slowdown in economic growth in 2023 compared to 2022 in Europe overall. And here we see two countervailing factors in play. On the one side, these are indeed lower energy prices, but on the other hand, it's very aggressive tightening in global financial conditions driven by the increases in the interest rates by the ECB and other central banks. So for now, we have, for our projections, suggest that the GDP growth in advanced Europe is projected to fall from 3.2% in 2022 to about 0.6% in 2023. This is a sharp decline. In emerging European economies, growth is projected to decline from about 4.3% to below 2% in 2023. This is also a sharp decline. So I do want to say that we will, these are the projections that we published in the Global World Economic Outlook back in October, and we will be releasing the updated outlook in about a week. But like the trend is the same, right? So like the numbers could change a little bit, but there is a significant decline in the pipeline for 2023. Of course, the quarterly profile is something that matters, and what we do expect is we expect some acceleration in growth towards the second half of the year, so like higher quarterly growth towards the fourth quarter and the third quarter. Similarly to economic outlook, we do project some slowdown in Serbia growth in 2023 compared to 2022. The good news are that we expect growth to bottom out in this year and to finally see 2024 on the upside. As for inflation, it's a fascinating story, right? Because so what is we have seen inflation that is so high that we haven't seen as high for decades. So some signs suggest that the inflation in Europe in some countries might have already peaked, and we may see some decline in the headline inflation through 2023. And there are two factors, big factors in play, like the energy prices and softening food prices. Right, and those were the main factors behind this spike in inflation over the past years. Another question is what exactly will happen with core inflation, because typically for core inflation it takes longer, more time to turn. Especially if we take into account still high wage growth, if we take into account relatively tight labor markets. And so the discussion is how quickly the core inflation will be going down and whether we will see headline inflation actually below core inflation in some countries in Europe. So this said, the uncertainty about all these projections, be it inflation, be it growth, be it fiscal outcome and balance of payment outcomes, is extremely high because the World Uncertainty Index, it spiked during the beginning of the war, right? It's moderated a little bit since then, but it's still at a very high level. So this brings me to the question, okay, what do we do in terms of macroeconomic policies? What is our recommendation? And the recommendation is that in the immediate term, macroeconomic policymakers should be still focusing on maintaining monetary and financial stability. And on the monetary side, the immediate challenge is to make sure that this inflation actually goes down. And the central banks are in a synchronized tightening cycle right now, even though I do see some central banks here and there paused tightening, and I think Moldova is thinking actually about relaxing their monetary policy stance. But the message that was given in Davos about a week ago is that the central banks have to be careful not to pull their foot from the brake too early, right? So remains to be seen, and the monetary policy decisions should be data-driven, depending on in the circumstances in each country. On fiscal policy, our main message is that fiscal policy should remain tight, and this is for two reasons. First, it is helping monetary policy to bring the inflation down, but also it helps to rebuild buffers because the external shocks seems to become more frequent, and the buffers are important. Recently I started getting questions about what would it take for the economy to warrant fiscal expansion. But I think what is more important right now is to discuss how to make fiscal consolidation as growth-friendly as possible. And this could be done in several ways, by channeling more resources to capital expenditure and prioritizing those resources within the capital expenditure envelope, prioritizing the projects that have high short-term multiplier, but also projects that would pave the way to private investment beyond the short term. Of course, the fiscal policy should continue addressing the cost of living crisis, but it needs to do it more efficiently with targeted measures. And our message is that broad-based measures are costly and they also propel inflation. A few words on energy policies, because energy sector policies have been in the center of discussion in all the European countries, and it was in the center of discussion in Serbia, and it has become a pillar or a main pillar, if you wish, of the IMF-supported program of the new IMF standby arrangement. And here the priority is to reach the financial viability of the energy state-owned enterprises in Serbia. The priority is to ensure energy security in the short term and medium term, but by prioritizing the investment and implement structural reforms to improve governance and management. And this is a very general phrase, structural reforms to improve governance and management. But I do want to say that these reforms are very important so that these adjustments that are done today to fix the cash flow of these companies, they have long-lasting effects. As for the other structural policies, improving business environment, developing agenda for green growth, fighting grey economy, these are all areas that should remain high on the agenda for any country that is searching for additional sources of growth. And on informal economy, I want to mention the important reforms that we implemented recently, e-fiscalization, like e-invoicing, like good reform momentum. And our colleagues from NALED recently published a study that shows quantitatively that the informal economy has been on a declining trend, but it's still high. Therefore, the reform momentum needs to be maintained, and adopting the draft program for combating shadow economy for the next year is something that will help maintain this momentum. And finally, just a few words about the new IMF-supported program that was approved in December 2022, just like a month ago. So it is a 24-month arrangement with semi-annual reviews, with our traditional quantitative targets, with our traditional structural benchmarks along the lines that I just discussed: energy sector policy, tight monetary and tight fiscal policy mix. And in the current challenging environment, why this program is needed, because in the context of uncertainty and really high energy bills, all these external financing needs were transformed into the fiscal financing needs, and this is where we stepped in. So the 1 billion euro were disbursed in December. So the authorities intend to draw some additional resources during 2023, but treat the rest as precautionary, because, as you see, it looks like the financial markets are reopening, right? So the country has an opportunity to borrow on the financial markets right now, and therefore it remains so we will continue our discussions with the authorities in March regarding the next steps under the program. With this, let me conclude and pass the mic to the colleagues.
Veliko hvala, gospođo.
Thank you, Mrs. Kostyugova, for your messages. From what you said, we would like to highlight that our alliance is not, dealing actually with macroeconomic issues, but we are working on the improvement of business environment, and we are trying to contribute to combating shadow economy, and we are definitely working to the same goal together. I would like to say that we need, let's move on with the agenda. I would like to ask Mrs. Dragoslav Mišković from OTP Bank. Dragoslav Veličković. So, what's your opinion? What was the last year like? What do you, how you see the last year? What can be expected in this year? What kind of growth we had? What growth we can expect? And of course, can you talk about the sectorial issues? Just describe your feeling, general feeling. Thank you. So last year, 2022, expected the growth initially was 4.5%, and then it went down to 2.2% in the second half. Of course, we know why. The reason was the war, and the second reason, which is also very important, was high inflation, which was expected. Unfortunately, central banks were late with the rate hikes. The average was 2%, but but it was late. Just last year, ECB started raising rates, and we see that the reaction was quite negative. S&P 500 was also dropped. The dollar was up. We had energy prices up. So in energy sector, we had a growth in dollars. But if you turn it, convert it in local currencies, the growth was even bigger. Of course, this has hit several sectors. So with the slow industrial production, we had citizen spending less, or the retail spending went down, and slow growth also was present in in Europe, in Italy and Germany, which are main markets. So this is the trend that we are actually have in 2023. So the growth expected for this year is, in that light. So our long-term growth rate is 4.5%, but it would be great if we can reach 1.5 this year. It's, the analysts are talking about whether Europe will have the soft landing in the first part of the year or maybe later throughout the year, or is it going to be a soft landing at all? A lot of money has been printed out, and by the central and rates are now high, so the money circulation is also high, but it's going down now, and so we have the money availability going down and higher rates. In the last month and a half, we see that the energy prices are again rising, even though they dropped in the later part of the last year, such as oil. So the Europe Purchasing Managers Index (PMI) also, which is still negative, but it's much better than expected, and also German PMIs, which is important for us. Some neighboring countries, and some European countries are, greatly indebted, more than 100% of the GDP. France will reach 128%. Italy is much above that. I think it's above 150%. We'll see the latest figures. Then there's a question whether the countries will be able to take on more of that if we are actually just reaching the crisis in the last 3 quarters. And also in 2021, we had a drop in agricultural production, so the climate changes are directly affecting, and we need to do something about that. So the floods are difficult to prevent. The rainy season is heavy nowadays. Then drought, also irrigation is missing. The droughts are completely different right now, and I hope that at least we'll have one normal season this year. Also, the rates going up are actually reducing the retail spending. We see that in the the levels of credits that are being taken by the retail, actually by the citizens. What's going to happen with the inflation? That's the most important question. Whether it's going to be suppressed, and maybe in the second half of the next year, maybe we will see the central banks that are going to start cutting rates. So we have issue of global inflation because of the lack of supply. So we have the supply side problems that are there and that are still there, but are lesser now. The reshoring is going on. We're trying to move production from one country to another country. The U.S. has a plan worth $100 billion to move some industries that actually, to withdraw some industries to U.S. Maybe you can, but there are no indication that you will create such a program. Some countries are supporting this kind of program. And so these are all the actually informations that we are missing, and they are less economic decisions, but are more political decisions. And so it's a big question over there, how things will develop. And the war in Ukraine was just additional fuel on fire. We don't know what are going to be the consequences if we have the growth of 1%, and if it happens mainly in the second half of the year, comparing to 2022. So as I said, the first 2 quarters were strong, but the second half of the year was very weak. So the base effect was very strong. So we are not going to be negative, but long-term growth of around 4.5% on annual basis. I don't think that it's going to happen this year. Thank you, Dragoslav, for such a nice a presentation. We will go back to some of these topics in the last part of the session. I am very much interested in learning about the investments in real estate, in the civil engineering, which is a sector that has been actually was the big booster of the economy. Maybe this question we can leave it for later on. I would like to ask my colleague Milor Zečević from Erste Bank to take the floor. We talked to Mrs. Ustjugova, so we heard Mrs. Veličković about the growth, about the structure of the growth, about the quality of growth, but from you probably what we want to hear is what are the financial market risks that are actually threatening to jeopardize the economy. So from the point of one biggest systemic bank, how do you see that these risks? Monetary, fiscal policy at the local level, at the national level, and the liquidity in the sector. So this liquidity risk, what can we expect in that sense? Are there any alarms that are going off? Thank you for the question. My colleagues have actually made a great introduction. Maybe they steal a bit of the show for me, because we are already living in this kind of environment for quite some time. So we are trying actually to give our best evaluations as we can. I agree with my colleague from OTP Bank very much. The serious conflict that we have in Europe, which is even getting worse every day, is making any assessment or forecasting very difficult. When we organized this panel, we were saying that we are going to talk about 2023. There's also a big question for the next winter. What can we expect also? The winter is not so strong, and the supplies are still pretty high. China, a big energy consumer, was mostly in a lockdown, so there's not much of a consumption happened there. So we need to monitor these things. Now China has abolished the zero-COVID policy, and we will see what's going to happen with their economy. According to IMF forecast, it's 4.4% for the following year. We are also monitoring how the real estate market is going to develop over there. Why? Because Europe is very much connected to China, and the growth of our economic partners is directly affecting us. And affect us additionally. If we talk about Germany, very important for us, the economic growth that we expect is 0.2 to 0.25, and also the consequences of the conflict. The German Chancellor Scholz said that in 2026 Germany can in 2026 through new LNG terminals can become independent from Russian energy. Stress is being, and the companies are focused on mitigating all of these challenges, and challenges are there. When we talk about Italy, also another very important trade partner of Serbia, we expect 0.8% growth, but with the economy with a lot of structural challenges and a big deficit, we have to have that in mind. What are we talking about these countries, because we cannot talk about Serbia in individual context. We have to think about it in the context of their major trade partners, because this is the environment we're working in. About local economy, we need to comment that political stability is extremely important. In a few days ago, we had a statement from the highest levels of our country, which actually was about the development that we can expect in the coming period. So it's very important that all decisions are made based on the economic indicators. We need to think who are our trade partners, where are the investments coming from. The GDP growth that was a colleague was mentioning is also very important to think about. We can expect 2%, maybe a bit higher than that in this year. That's our view. And in these circumstances, we can say that it would be good to have that. Yeah. For local economy, it's very important to have a stabilization of energy sector, reconstruction of companies. We see some specific. We will have Kostolac soon joining the grid, which will add 5%. We know that during winter we import around 10% of our actually needs. We have good hydrological environment right now, and we see the stabilization of the power production in EPS, and this is very important. We are know that energy is a engine, is a driver of the economy, and this energy transition should be adequately financed. Within that, it's important to say that all political moves are leading to a situation where the maneuvering space is not reduced in terms of taking on international borrowing, taking on international debt. Also, containing inflation as soon as possible is very important. It's a different kind of animal, the inflation, and it helped that the nominal GDP to go up to around 60 billion last year, but it has its own cost in time, because the investments and consumption do not like, and spending do not like a long-term inflation. So in the base scenario, everybody's forecasting that it's going to go back to the so-called inflation corridor. And we hope that it's going to go back to that corridor at the start of 2025. When we talk about central banks, it's very important for us to see what ECB is doing. The National Bank of Serbia, it's very important for it to understand that in a total level of financial debt is 35% is in dinners. So tightening and raising interest rates is just targeting just one part of the the sector, and other part, a bigger sector is actually indexed or anchored to euro. So the ECB has started this tightening, but rather late because the dispersion of inflation in Europe is, pretty much different. If you take a look at France, we know that they have to do the repair of a lot of nuclear reactors. It's good that the headline inflation has started slowing down, but the core inflation is still growing, and in December it was 5.2% for the whole EU. In next week's meeting, we expect another 0.5% of tightening. And probably next meeting is going to have the same 0.5 basis points. So maybe so we can expect additional 1.25% from here on. So the futures projections of the 3-month Euribor showing that between June and September it's going to be between 3 and 4%, so that the companies can plan their debts, because this is directly affecting their euro-anchored loans. When we talk about the MBS, the reference interest rate has been corrected, and we are now at 5.25%. And this correction has to take into account what percentage of the assets are subject to that. This gradual approach is justified. We expect more tightening. We think additional 0.5%, but in increments of 0.25. Now, about loans, the sector is very much liquid, excluding mandatory reserves. So between 20 to 250 billion dinars in daily liquidity, and we had a historic level of available funds recently. So as the central bank tightens and the surplus is significant, so the economy should not be worried that these corrections, because the surplus is still high. And we still have a good high rates at good high rates for deposits, for bank deposits. They're still paying 6%, and the rapid transactions are there still at more than 4%. So these corrections are good for budgeting. As the tightening happens, we will have additional slowing down, particularly will be affecting the cash loans. Now, talking about the euro loans, the liquidity is good. As the ECB is tightening, our costs are going up, and this is going to, of course, affect the domestic market. Now about a retail sector, we are between 2.5% to 3%, and for industry it's even lower rate. So 3% of the biggest clients in the country control 50% of the bank deposits. So high concentration, which is in the moments of the higher interest rates, and also increasing the deposit rates. This is actually going to reflect the rates going down, which is our base scenario so 2-year auction, which has been realized 2 days ago, with the 5.95 yield. Also, the deposits of the legal entities are also high. We have to have that into consideration as well.
Many macro.
Thank you, Milos. This was really interesting, at least to me, and I'm sure that later on we will have more opportunities to discuss about this, and I would like to invite everyone, online guests, guests that are here, and everybody to ask questions. Milos, I believe that we will discuss some structural changes. I believe that an interesting structural change concerns the sources of borrowing for the country, so shifting the focus from local banks to the foreign banks. This is something that we should notice, observe. Naturally, Uroš, once again, thank you for your participation. I think, Uroš, that, and I believe that from your perspective, things are best seen. And basically, I'm talking about challenges and risks, but also some bottlenecks that you detected, bottlenecks that prevent better growth for companies. Those are the companies. What is priority for our industries? You have lots of contacts. You see lots of balances and situations. So I believe that you can tell us more about the opportunities that you see for growth, for better growth in the short and medium term. Thank you for your opportunity. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to be here and to listen to my colleagues. This was an extraordinary introduction. I would like to begin with risks and challenges, and this may look like a disaster, but I will finish on a positive note. I don't want us to go home totally depressed. But all jokingly, in all seriousness, I think that the environment that we live and work in may be described with the English acronym WUTSA. Most of you are familiar with it. This is the acronym that describes the environment that is volatile and insecure, that is complex, ambivalent. And in such an environment, we are exposed to a very complex situation. And it's very difficult to tell risks apart because everything is so interconnected. And in this regard, at the end of one year and at the beginning of another, this is the period where consulting companies such as ours do our studies and research. And in one of those studies, and we have published the results thereof recently, we discussed with CEOs of the biggest companies in the world in 11 markets, and we wanted to tell us about challenges, the biggest ones, as they see them for the coming period. And I thought that this would be interesting for me to present it right now. And I think that this is relevant to us, irrespective of the fact that this was at the global level. Finally, we are a part of the world. But what they designated as four wider areas are economic environment, taken in its wider sense. My colleague mentioned that. Then technology, talent, people, right? And finally, but not the least important, the last but not the least important, something that we started talking about in Serbia is macroeconomic situation. My colleagues talked a lot about it, but from the perspective of businesses, there is a very clear consensus that the recession will happen, and they have all switched to this tightening mode. But what they do not agree about is about its seriousness, how serious it will be. And we see drastic opinions here, drastically different opinions about it, how serious it will be. On the other hand, I don't know whether this is wishful thinking or reality, simply. The majority of companies believe that they're ready to respond to those challenges. And they look at the coming situation as a difficult one, but something that in the midterm will bring potential for growth. They did some changes internally. They've made some changes. They review or re-examine their investment decisions. They shift their money flows. But what is the matter of concern, and I don't like it, I must admit, is the old-fashioned attitude. Is when you see the crisis coming, you would cut costs, you would try to keep your margins, and we can see this in the publications that, for instance, IT sector is ready to lay off many people and others. And we will come to the topic that concerns the talent, but I'm afraid, and I'm not even sure that I'm afraid. Maybe I wish that that people never forgive this, that these companies are not forgiven if they do so, because circumstances have changed, and COVID pandemic has clearly shown that. As for the economic environment, I think that there's no need to go into detail anymore. I think that geopolitical insecurity is the main source of problems with energy sources, and there are problems that surfaced up during the COVID crisis, and now they've got deeper with the energy crisis and with the war in Ukraine, and now we see the overlapping effect, and it's very difficult to say what is the cause of what. Because everything is so interconnected. As for the technology, we see two topics that have become crystal clear. One is cybersecurity, as an area that is becoming strategically important for companies. And also, this is what the war in Ukraine has shown very well, that cyberspace is the space where the wars are waged now. And at the beginning of the year, we saw this case where we see how this can be very, very problematic practically, in practice. And another thing that is also a challenge, but also an opportunity, is destructive technologies. Digitalization is not ending, it's picking up the pace, and disruptive technologies are the technologies that are a potential obstacle to further growth if we do not approach it adequately. Now, when we talk about the crisis and preparations for the recession, this is where we need to consider things that are colliding. On the one hand, you're aware that it is important to invest and to keep investing into the transformation and focus on your weaknesses. And on the other hand, it is clear that you are slowing down, that your spending is in digital technologies is slowing down. As for the talent, I think that the COVID pandemic, I don't know what is pre-COVID or post-COVID, this is our new reality now, but period. So we discovered that the talent crisis is a real thing, is the thing, and we feel this in our companies. This is the area where people are, in fact, waken up the companies and made them think differently about what people feel and what they want as benefits, because when your health is threatened, when your life is threatened, you re-examine everything. You start re-examining everything. So the salary and the old models of operations are no longer valid. And this is where the companies who were responsible profited most. Those who understood their employees profited most. On the other hand, what is very clear, and we see that from some other studies, is that people more and more want to know what their purpose is, and the companies need to think about their purpose. They need to start thinking about their why. And as I said a moment ago, I deeply believe that new generations, I don't know what alphabetical letter is now used to designate them, to mark them, but they would not forgive the companies if they do them harm. And this is so interconnected. Things are so interconnected because in 2020, 2021, companies viewed the technology and people as antagonists, and they paid more attention to technology But now it's becoming clear that the technology needs people, needs humans, and now this has been the topic of many topics, open playground, and this is a very current topic. And I I played these games, and I saw a very interesting post that says you're not going to replace EI, but people who use EI will replace it. But the last but not least important is ESG, and it's becoming clear that this is not a simple thing. This is not about marketing and communication. I cannot say that this has nothing to do with corporate responsibility. Yes, it does, but up to very limited point. ESG must be a serious, must be based on a serious strategic plan, because all stakeholders and organizations are interested in this. The regulators, the employees, the businesses, and companies worldwide, and our companies must approach it very proactively, because this is becoming something that will help us survive, the factor of survival, but also the potential source of a competitive advantage. Now, I don't know whether we are ready to move on to this positive note, to this positive aspect of my presentation, but seriously, these are the factors that require attention. And a lack of it, if we don't pay attention to them, it is very clear that this will result in penalties. Reshoring is one of the opportunities. Somebody mentioned it, but this is another opportunity that has appeared, especially in this region, and one because of the crisis of the supply chain, and another is because of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and because the fact is that big companies are moving their supply chains closer to them, and this is an opportunity for economies such as ours. And in order for us to use this properly, we need to take into account all other factors and aspects that I mentioned, and also ESG, adequate implementation of the technology, humans or people. And how should I put it? The time of the crisis is not just the time for you to think how to survive, but historically speaking, it has always turned out that the companies who think what they need to do to take advantage, those were the companies that were victorious. And that's why we need to pay attention to the midterms and longer terms, and therefore ESG has an opportunity, has the capacity to revolutionize doing business. And this is very, very similar to what happened during the digital revolution. And we have to be smart about this, and to think about this, and to use all the smart conclusions that were drawn based on the digital revolutions. Now, in terms of ESG, and what is difficult for us, we as consultants see that companies don't know where to start from. This is a very wide topic, and what we see is, how should I put it? This is very similar to the outset of the digital revolution, as they would say in English, it would be like you dip the finger in the water to see whether the water is hot. But the strategy that is needed, or what happened is, like, those companies that were shy during the digital revolution were lagging behind. So this is not about one person doing something. ESG is something that concerns the whole company, something that lurks in every, or is seen in every corner of the company, and this is how this topic should be approached. And I recently read something, I think that maybe this was said by our company. So ESG is not something that you do, it's everything that you do. And that's absolutely true. And if we have that approach, this can be an enormous source of comparative advantage. And this is not the topic for the Western countries, this is the topic for our country. And we mentioned the economic relations with Germany. In Germany, we see Corporate Due Diligence Act being adopted and coming into effect, where they invite their companies to analyze their supply chains. So who is working with Germany will have potential problems if they do not comply with the standards required. I described it as a trivial thing, but this is what happens. This is what is going on. But in order to sum this up, if we're talking about the technology and people, both are important. They need to be merged together, put in the same place. As I said, people need the technology needs the people. ESG is the part of the agenda that should be approached strategically. And finally, this momentum, this time, that seem desperate and without any solutions should be used for us to think about our next steps that we should make in order to gain advantage over our competitors. And what I liked, I recently discussed this with a colleague of mine and a friend of mine, and I know that this is not based in science and in evidence and data, but when you take a look at these global circumstances, the global economy was reset and returned to the beginning. And when something is at the beginning, this is a very great advantage for us who are at the beginning, because we are at the beginning. Everything starts from scratch, and this is where we are.
Okay, Marco, if I can comment, because a very interesting topic, employment and talents. Serbia has a big challenge. That's a problem related to workforce and such. We see that our pension system has a rather big challenges ahead. It's important to mention this trend, which is unfortunate, and I will try to choose the words carefully. Our country has also faced major conflicts in the region. We know what we experienced, that the consequence of what's going on in Ukraine is that a lot of Ukrainians are are now in Germany, in Austria, where we also have our people over there. I think 20 to 30,000 of our people are actually leaving to those countries, and so these people will also contribute to the workforce there, and we will see how is this going to affect the trend that we are having with our workforce. The country has recognized this trend of brain leaving out, and brain drain. So the country has recognized this problem, the government has recognized the problem, and some measures have been already adopted. Let's see how we're going to face these problems. Thank you, Milos. Thank you, Milos. Thank you, Uroš. We have actually, moved to a discussion part of our sessions. So key takeaways are, now about what you said and how I heard it, among other things, so digitalize the company and socially accountable company which is following the ESG principles is a resilient one. And I'm pointing out this because our analysis is actually gathering such companies, so which are actually a good news for us, I believe. Personally, I would like to take a look at some figures and some numbers. Maybe some cross-sectional analysis would be interesting, and organize a panel about it to see how much of these principles are actually followed in doing business, and how it affects in creating a greater productivity and greater profitability. But definitely interesting. Again, you forgot to mention people. People are very much important factor. So these three things are very much important. I will quote one very smart person I have met recently. He said, and I said I'm going to quote him, he said that technology are just a palette of colors. But how are you going to use the colors to paint is the most important thing. So AI is, yes, there. it's created, but somebody has to readapt it to use it for certain needs. So AI, artificial intelligence, can contribute greatly to future human progress. It's a challenging time ahead of us, but interesting time. I'm more excited than worried. Glad to hear that. But I would like to ask our panelists if they have a comment from any comment. Before we move to ask them, before we move to questions that are on slides, so panelists, first, you have a chance to comment to what you heard so far, if you want to, please. If there are no comments, okay, let's move to the questions. I will read the questions in the order we got them. We'll, direct them as I feel they should be, but if I make a mistake, please correct me. So this question is for everybody. How in the reference interest, or how high a reference interest rate, how high you expect it to be in 2023, probably by the end of 2023, so end of year interest rate in Serbia, probably. Miloš, that's for you. And what's the projection of the credit activity growth? I think this is a question for OTP and Erste. You are a system banks, but I think you are in top 5 by your balance sheet. So reference rate, what's the expected market rate? So both for corporate and retail customers. And additional question. Okay, actually, first, please respond to this question. Thank you for your question. I will try not to talk too much. So current crisis has not originated from the banking sector, which is great comparing to 2008. So definitely not from the banking sector. So as opposed to 2008, banks are now in Serbia are highly capitalized. Uncollectible debt ratios are very low. Their budgets, banks have business risks already planned and forecasted, and we don't see it as overly difficult this year, and we will be able to support our clients. Now, when we talk about the overall growth, the last year has shown that in corporate sector, the credit dynamic growth is actually following the inflation rate growth, especially in the working assets credit segment, the investment, as well as in investments credits, especially in the energy efficiency sector, and the trend there was very strong. This year, comparing to the expected inflation dynamics, so we can expect this 8 to 9% level in terms of the corporate crediting dynamics should follow it, and compared to previous year, we will be in the cycle of the final tightening of both ECB and the domestic central bank. So so the companies will, try to weigh whether to take on the loans or maybe right now maybe postpone them for a better times if they see inflation going down, in 2024. But definitely in the segment of legal entities, definitely the crediting activity will follow the inflation dynamics. Now about retail, where we have a lot of cash loans, where the rates are high, which are more than 10%. So we expect a modest slowdown. As also in the real estate or the mortgage sector, having in mind that the real estate prices are also going up, which is also affected by a lot of Russian citizens moving, taking part in this real estate market. Having in mind a high liquidity in the sector, there are not going to be no effects or benefits are expected from the additional tightening. ECB will do most of the job as they add 0.5% to the after every meeting. And this is going to affect the real estate market, but people are asking why the mortgage hasn't gone up on a monthly basis, because it has to do with the adjustment periods that are done 3 months or 6 months, depending on the type of mortgages. But these effects will be seen in the second part of the year when the adjustments are done every 6 months, depending on the. Now, I think that what Miloš said is pretty much realistic. This is what we expect as well. The reference interest rate in Serbia should be maximum 6% by the end of the year. First half of the year, sorry. In the third or fourth quarter, we may even see the rates going down as the inflation goes down in light of the expected lower economic growth. So we will see what ECB will do. But inflation has started going down in the U.S., so there are also signs of inflation going down in Europe. So we expect the stabilization of rates, and this slower growth and potential recession will at some point cause a rate cuts. So as we are still in the macroeconomic sphere, so a natural question is this one. We know that the economy is anchored to euro, so the monetary effects are limited by the fact that euro is used in our market as a payment means. For us, for the national bank, the exchange rate, the dinar exchange rate is very important. It was stable. We know that the fundaments that are actually affecting the currency rate are also stabilized, but this is affecting the market. So are there any changes in that respect? Are they indicating there will be changes of the currency rate, go up or down, whichever? So are there any changes in those fundamentals, in these fundamental factors, having in mind the macroeconomic risks that are coming from the external environment? Of course, banks, this is a question for you, but also other participants can answer this question as well. Thank you for your question. This is one of the questions that we get most often. Previous year was very much interesting. We had the big challenge of the Ukrainian war, the war in Ukraine. This had affected the trade deficit, the payment deficit. The central bank had to react to that, having in mind the higher risk in their sector and certain withdrawals of dinar deposits and conversion mostly to euro. So in March and April, we had central bank interventions focused on selling euros and reducing the foreign currency reserves. So the trend has been changed early in May, and it was supported by the tourist season, transit through the country, and as the inflation was actually putting pressure on the spending capacity or the purchasing power, then citizens started moving those monies into dinar to finance everyday spending. Also, we had a trend of the arrival of Russian citizens who have also brought foreign currency with them, which are actually contributed to these to the spending. Also, high foreign direct investments also contributed to that. So this year has been has ended with a historical record in terms of the foreign currency reserves, also supported by the IMF, first tranche from IMF of almost 1 billion, plus the loan from the United Arab Emirates to 100 billion dinars. So just coming into, are actually with today's maturity, are coming into a sector which is going to contribute to the liquidity. So all prerequisites are there, and the central bank is intervening with buying euros. So the currency rate is stable, and it has good support to be kept at this level throughout the year. Now, in the long term, nobody knows what are going to be the FDIs in future. Also, payments from abroad have also contributed, because Europe is in a bit better situation than we expected. There are also other risks, but I would like to hear the opinion of my colleague. Also, we expect that the currency rate will be very much stable and that no major changes will take place. Current payments deficit is stable, so if the investments cover the deficit of the current account, I don't see the rate will be changed. The reserves at the historic level. Also, a long-term trend is the export growth is faster than the import growth. Have in mind the investment growth. So we don't expect we expect no big change in this regard. Maybe we haven't. Eugenia, maybe this question is good. Eugenia, this is a question for you. We haven't had the opportunity to talk about the external environment. In terms of our neighboring, I'm talking about the Southeast Europe. I haven't monitored the situation in our neighboring countries, because we don't have so much economic cooperation such as with Italy and Germany. What's going on in the neighboring countries, if EMF has looked into it, and I know that KPMG has also looked at the neighboring countries. If you have some opinion about this external environment that might affect our market.
Thank you, Marco. I think the question is about the regional environment, right?
Absolutely,
rather than
yes.
like external overall, because like what matters for the economic dynamics of Serbia, it's like, let's say, big four, right?
Absolutely.
Like Germany, Austria, Italy, like maybe France. Yeah. So like all together, like the advanced economies. While it is of course important to take into account what is happening in the region, because the region, like the small open economies, they are being affected by the same shocks, but like to a different extent, right? So we have an IMF-supported program with North Macedonia, again, to address the same sources of concern and the same shocks. So the energy crisis and the fiscal cost of the energy crisis, with an important like structural agenda to, again, close the financing gaps. Like Macedonia, like Albania, there are no IMF financing arrangements, but there are lots of discussions that are taking place regularly about the appropriate macroeconomic policy response. The big question, of course, that we are looking right now, how the countries are financing their fiscal needs, and what we have seen is that the emerging markets finally were able to tap the global financial markets and issue the Eurobonds, that this is something that everyone was waiting for to happen, and that we have seen Hungary and Romania tapping the Eurobond market, and North Macedonia preparing the other issuance, and Serbia, which already has issued. So for now, our growth projections are very cautious. As always, we like to be surprised on the upside, and the policy recommendations are very much in line with what we have discussed. Wait-and-see approach, data-driven policy decisions. very agile policy response, tight fiscal, tight monetary, in order to maintain macroeconomic and financial stability, because the uncertainty is very high, and therefore rebuilding buffers. This is the key message across the region.
Microphone. I'm not getting the microphone. So I think that what's specific, I don't remember that we had a situation where both monetary and fiscal policy were expansive at the same time. It was in the COVID crisis, yes, but we are trying to find the way to go back to the normal, to regular flow, which is a risk, because these are the unknown waters. So we haven't still, dipped into these waters to see how it is. But the North Macedonia, as you said, Hungary, are, trying to join the international markets with these bonds. And so these are good news, as you said, and I think it's a good news. We have a question from the audience. Dusan, you wanted to ask a question? I need a microphone. It's not a question, it's a statement, but I see from the comments that the presentations were really fascinating. This question is for Mrs. Ustjugova. It's related to one of the priorities that we have in our alliance, is the fiscal disburdening of the wages. I understand that you said that is there a room for disburdening of the lowest wages? Is there a room for that? Fiscal relief. Mislim da se to radi na godišnjem nivou i već je postala tradicija godišnjeg budžetskog procesa gde se bavimo sa nivom zarada i što će naravno na odgovarajući način reflektirati u budžet.
Microphone, please.
Dragoslav,
Dragoslav, I think that this question concerns particular sectors, and I think I announced this during your presentation. It's about sectors. So what you expect, what are your expectations? Real estate market, investment sector, it was the engine for the economy until 2018. There were strong growth rates that were driven on the demand side, and as for the supply side, it was in the construction market. And we see lately that the non-metal minerals industry and production sector that produces construction material, is going down. What does this tell us? I believe that you are monitoring the situation here. Is this a sort of a balloon or bubble? I don't believe that it's a bubble. There were several factors to this. Very low interest rates. It was very easy to borrow and invest that money to fund these sectors. And another thing, interest rates were zero, literally. If you wanted to earn something, if the interest rate for the deposit is zero, one of the options in Serbia is to, instead of keeping your money in the account, to spend it to buy real estate. So now, if you don't put your money in the bank, you can buy the real estate. And we see that the prices are growing. The prices of the real estate are growing. And we see that this is going on. And the question is when it will stop. So this is one of the reasons why it happened. Also in 2020, there was a shock because of the COVID. And then in 2021, because we exited it, and this was also a shock. And then in the last year, we experienced high inflation and the things that happened to interest rates. We see that there will be some growth, but you cannot record 20-25% growth every year. This is not realistic in every sector. So this is $1 million question. But I have a comment about this. I will present it as a fact that I've read it. I read something. I listened to and watched the analysis of a regional bank. Their representatives are not here, and this is not a Serbian entity. So this is a bank from the region, and they compared the real estate prices in Europe with the amount that is needed. So how many average net salaries are needed to buy an apartment. So the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, and Serbia were at the top of the list. So I was shocked. For Slovenia, there is a practical solution because there is a very limited area for construction. So they have deficit of buildings, of apartments. And that's because of that, this is so. And it was incredible for me to see that we are also at the top of the list. And the differences were significant. I think that this study has shown that in Serbia, you need 11.5 average gross, he said, gross salaries to buy an apartment. And I said that I will not comment this, but it was very interesting. This was very interesting. Maybe 11 years. Another question that concerns sectors. One thing concerns the investments, and another thing concerns the energy. And we were all lucky to see that this winter was a mild one. And we were not the only ones who were lucky. Europe was also happy about this. But we see that the trends change significantly before our eyes. So what can be expected given this unusual behavior of the weather, given this unusual weather, because in our agricultural areas we know that they haven't even seen the snow. So we know that you are an expert in this, so I would like to use this opportunity. Well, the fact that I have a vineyard doesn't mean that I'm a weather expert. I wouldn't be here had I been the expert in weather. Well, everything there are no free rides. Last year we had normal conditions, and then we experienced 3 months of a drought, of a very dry period. But because of that, we had poor results during the harvest. And now we see that there's no snow. On the one hand, this is good because of the energy situation, but this would reduce consumption. And now, we will have to pay for this? Maybe the summer will be also warmer. Maybe we will spend more for air conditioning during this summer, than we ever imagined that we will spend on energy now to heat up our spaces. So basically, the statistics doesn't help. In this, what I expect is to have normal harvests, normal production. Okay, so another season with a potentially lower results. Well, I expect normal. You cannot say that this will decrease. The question is what will come later. So during the New Year's Eve, I mean, this was we had 20 degrees, which is not normal. And this doesn't mean that we will not see -10 in February. You don't know that. Dragoslav, thank you. We have come close to the end of this session. There is another question here. I have a question. You mentioned macroeconomic trends, but you mentioned USA and Europe and comparison between USA, Europe, and China. What are the trends in these three areas? Given that Europe, in this due to this unfortunate war that has lasted for longer than a year, has encountered the biggest problems with energy. So how does this reflect to other big economic powers like the USA and China?
Thank you. That's a good one. Yeah. Look, so of course, like when we talk about monetary and fiscal policy, we always compare the United States and the EU. And on monetary policy, we compare what the Fed is doing with what the ECB is doing, right? The Fed has started tightening early, the ECB started tightening later, but it is now being like more hawkish than the Fed. The Fed now, so if you look at the financial markets, how they price the future adjustment in the Fed interest rates, like they actually see even like some slowdown in the adjustments and even like some cuts in the second half of the year. This means that in terms of the economic cycle, like the two areas, like two countries, right, like in a different situation, right? This of course affects the relative exchange rate between the US dollar and euro, and this is exactly what how we see like what is happening with the exchange rate in dinar relative to euro and relative to dollar. So when it comes to China, yeah, so that's a big player, and what was announced in Davos is that China will grow like next year, but the growth will not be as strong as what we had seen during the pre-COVID years. But even that is enough to raise concerns about what will happen with the commodity prices, what exactly will be the drivers of the growth, whether it will be the consumption and investment, because when it is investment, it naturally drives the commodity prices, the metal prices, the energy prices, and also the sources of imports for China, that, like especially for energy, also matters. Yeah. Thank you.
Hvala, Julija. Ja stvarno... Aha, dobro.
Thank you, Julia. But I would like to use my role or to abuse my role of the chairman and to ask another question that really concerns me. I'm talking about the real estate prices. They're now sky high. And is it possible, in addition to all of these factors, given the fact that most real estate units were purchased with the means of cash, money kept in somewhere hidden in the house and so on, is it possible that the prices of real estates are driven, given the fact that they're presented in euros, are they going to remain high because of that? Because of our inflation. This is dinar inflation. It's 15%, and I think that it's 11%. The target inflation, the inflation targeted by the MBS is 11%. Is the prices of the real estate would take into account the dinar inflation? Are the prices high because of this inflation? And you see that this has an impact in retail prices as well. Most companies here to take into account euro, and if euro is stable and inflation is growing, is there a correlation here between the rate and the inflation? Because we greatly, as the economy, or we as people, a mentality here is such that we rely on euro. We take into account euro before we took into account Deutschmarks, because at some point we calculate everything in euros. And if the dinar prices are rising and the exchange rate is stable, this means that the prices are going up. This is something that hikes the prices in euros as well. Because people see that dinar inflation is increasing. Is this the question for today, or should we answer it tomorrow? If I may, I have a brief comment, because this is very important for us, for our planning, for projections, for housing loans, and also for the long-term planning in the housing sector. The dynamic of real estate prices is dangerous to be viewed in the short term. If you take a look at the census, you see that we are now 500,000 people short. Basically, are we going, we need to take into account the rents as well as the real estate prices. So we have to take into account that at some point these real estate units will not be able to generate profit as they're doing it now. Also, Bloomberg says that 100,000 Russian people fled or came to Serbia. Also 50,000 or so came from Ukraine. And this is something that drives the prices up. When you take these factors into account in time, over time, we would have to correct the trend or make adjustments to the trend. But it's very difficult now to make any long-term estimates in this area right now. Thank you very much. Do you have anything to say?
With my colleague from the Erste Bank also, so what matters is like, which part is domestic demand, which part is the external demand, right? Which is like ad hoc demand. And on the domestic component, it's the wage growth that matters, right? So,
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that we now have to finish our discussion, and I would like to read out another question. I have to read this out. This is a colleague who did the estimate, Jasna Atanasievich. She's in the States. She's a Fulbright scholarship user. So the question is for the KPMG representative, and it's an open question. So what is your opinion about the IT crisis, global crisis, and how do you expect it will spill over in our country? Because this sector has been a successful one in recent years. And with this question, I would like to announce that there will be an informal conversation and discussion after this formal part is over, and we will finish this formal part with this question.
Okay, frankly speaking, I'm not sure that I can provide a well-grounded answer that's actually grounded in data. I'm not pessimistic, and I don't think it's going to affect dramatically the sector, which in Serbia, it's supranational, but if you look in the trends that we see in services that we provide and our clients' needs, and we see how the market is developing, we see a lot of opportunities for further digital, for further fast digital transformation, and a lot of opportunities for the so-called low-code solutions. There are a lot of companies that are actually working on that here, and I'm probably boring with this ESG agenda, but these things are, two things are very much connected. Digital can be a supporting factor that will, actually support the transition. IT sector and other sectors through economic cycles has to adapt to the new trends and the client needs. So I don't see anything that's dramatic, but it doesn't mean that there will not be required some kind of transformation. If we look at the wave of people coming from Russia and Ukraine, that's actually an influx of brain, because a lot of companies from that sector actually come in to the local environment and have a positive impact on the local environment. So I'm not a macroeconomist, so I don't want to do any kind of forecast, but if you look at our economy, is very much fragile, and some small events from one year to another that dramatically change the situation that can affect it. It's a reality of not only our market, it's the reality of all countries of the former Yugoslavia, including even Croatia and Slovenia, which are EU members. Thank you. I'd like to recommend to finish here. Thank you for this formal part, and thank you for the informal part and discussion. Of course, we'll drink some food. Thank you.